welcome to E-PG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Chariwag, Assistant Professor at Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I have coordinated the course on Sociology of India. Today we are going to discuss the module Feminist Approach to the Study of Indian Society by Leela Dube. This module has been written by Polomi Ghosh, research scholar, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. Why is it important to study Leela Dube? It is important because she is the first anthropologist in the country whose work has centered on gender and kinship, explicitly defined by feminist perspective. So, in order to get an understanding about how feminists have understood the society in India, especially in terms of kinship, it is very important to read through the works of Leela Dube. The objective of the module is to explore how the discipline of sociology of India or the study of Indian society can be done from a feminist lens. Second, how does that analysis makes it different from other perspectives of studying Indian society? And finally, how does this perspective help in shaping the discipline of sociology of India? The feminist approach of Leela Dube. Introduction. Leela Dube has perhaps been the first anthropologist in the country whose work has centered on gender and kinship, underlined by explicit feminist perspective. It is reckoned that both Iravati Karve and Kathleen Gao had studied kinship systems and women's positions within them, and they both had hugely influenced Leela Dube. Leela Dube was different on account of having the advantage of being part of the initiation of the women's studies movement in India in the context of the second wave of feminism. This led to her having a wider and more critical framework for viewing gender relations in kinship systems. The systematic study of gender and kinship together is of relatively recent vintage, catalyzed by the women's movement and women's studies scholarship. In India, public discourses in the 1970s and 80s on personal laws and uniform civil code, on dowry and domestic violence, and on the imbalance in sex ratio inevitably led to questions about the nature of marriage and the ideological constitution of the household family. But among the core group of early women's studies scholars, there was little cognition of ethnographic materials or anthropological approaches. Conversely, in the existing vast anthropological literature on kinship and sociological literature on family, there were descriptions of the role of women but no problematization of gender. Leela Dube bridged these fields, catalyzing the development of gender and kinship studies in India. She sensitized women's studies scholarship to the methods and theoretical insights of anthropology, not to mention the reverse, alerting anthropology to the possibilities of women's studies scholarship. In the early debate about multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity in women's studies, she held that feminists but also engaged with fundamental debates of their own primary disciplines in order to avoid being ghettoized and marginalized. Ganesha. This paper will situate Leela Dube's feminist perspective in social anthropology by discussing some of her most important work. Thus, for the sake of clarity, the paper is classified into three parts based on a major work: Construction of Gender in the Hindu Context, Women and Kinship, Anthropological Explorations into Gender. Construction of Gender. In her article, The Construction of Gender, Hindu Girls in Patrilineal India, Dube discusses the mechanisms through which women acquire the cultural ideas and values through which they shape their own image. She focuses on aspects of process of socialization of Hindu girls through rituals, ceremonies, use of language and narratives, and practices within and in relation to the family. Dube uses various cultural idioms and expressions to convey how language too is a tool through which the subsidiary position of women is constructed in daily life. To extrapolate, she gives the example of a Telugu expression which translates into bringing up a daughter is like watering a plant in another's courtyard. This expression brings to attention the clear dissent of having to bring up daughters or being parents of only daughters. This one sentence summarizes the problems of dowry, inequality experienced by women, and lack of support that parents might feel in their old age if they only have daughters. It also points to the expected short stay of a girl in a natal home. The birth of the girl and her socialization is underlined by the norm of patriarchality, which is largely followed in the Indian subcontinent. Therefore, girls grow up with the notion of temporary membership within their natal home. The relationship of a girl with a natal home is further explained by Leela Dube by using the metaphor of Durga Puja or Gauri Puja that is celebrated in various parts of the country. It is a festival which commemorates Gauris, that is Shiva's wife in Hindu mythology, visiting to her natal home after marriage. Songs sung by women during the festival describe how Gauri implores to Shiva to let her go home for a short visit, and he replies with a sense of arguments which encapsulate the duties and responsibilities of a good wife. According to Leela Dube, one interesting argument put forth by Shiva is that Ganesha, their son, is used to the luxuries and can make some demands which might prove to be embarrassing for Gauri's parents since they are poor. This metaphorical visit lasts for a brief period of 3 to 4 days and is celebrated with lot of enthusiasm. Then is a stage of farewell, which is dramatized as a sad and heavy atmosphere. The entire celebration establishes, reinstates and perpetuates a temporary connection of the girl with her natal home. It also signifies the lack of autonomy on part of the girl to decide whether to visit her natal home and for how long. The ideals of a good wife narrated by Shiva are a metaphor on how much weight the wish and the demand of a husband carries over his wife and her autonomy regarding mobility and her submissiveness and obedience as feminine attribute. Another interesting wedding ceremony Leela Dube looks into is a ritual of a bride throwing rice over her shoulder while leaving her natal home after marriage in Bengali wedding. This is symbolic metaphor for the bride acknowledging that she has eaten and lived in her parents' house for all the years before marriage and that she throws a rice as a gesture of returning her debt to her parents, thus terminating all possibilities of further economic dependence on them. The dowry giving in marriage is another important custom with its own consequence. It implies that once a woman has taken a dowry and has left her natal home, she has no further obligations towards the maintenance of that household. It also raises the issue of why boys don't react against dowry. Considering that they are seen as future providers of the home, there is a huge pressure on them to live up to that expectation. He is induced to do well not just for himself but also for his family, which makes it difficult to say no to the dowry because it has the capability of improving one's lifestyle overnight. These practices, constructed into everyday language of people, constructs an unequal social reality for women. The construction of femininity is another important topic covered under this module. Dube gives numerous examples of various customs and rituals which mark the pre-pubertal and post-pubertal phases of girls. Beginning from Kashmir in the northwest, the custom of worshipping and the ritual feeding of virgin girls, that is Kanya, on special occasions is widespread in India. In most of the pre-pubertal girls, the girl is worshipped as a form of some devi or goddess, which is mostly a feminine role, and purity and consecrated position assigned in these rituals help to make a stark contradiction in the post-pubertal ritual. The onset of puberty is a tremendous change for girls and is likened to the process of flowering or blooming. It signifies the readiness of marriage and fertility. In Andhra Pradesh, the pre-pubertal girls wearing long skirt and a blouse, but after puberty she is gifted a half sari, which is shorter in length and easier to manage, but also serves the function of covering the upper portion of the body. It is a sign of acknowledging publicly that the girl has come of age. The post-pubertal phase then is characterized by restriction of movements and on interaction with males and by imposition of special safeguards. This is done to manage her sexuality, which is tied to her future as a wife and a mother. The discussion of controlling women's sexuality brings into the concept of boundary maintenance, which is crucial element in the definition of cultural vulnerability of young women and emphasis on their purity and restraint in behavior. This leads to the construction of legitimate and proper codes of conduct that the young girls have to adhere to, not only in terms of the behavior but also in their organization of space and time. The need to control female sexuality is constructed as protection for the girl not only from other males but also from her own sexuality. This is expressed in metaphors such as the need to emphasize the maintenance of a physical distance between a man and a woman. It is said that unless a physical distance is maintained between hay and fire, there is nothing to prevent the hay from catching fire. A girl is often demanded to create a separate space for herself even in public or when with strangers because the prescriptions regarding the ways girls behave and act are set out in the context of space and time. If the space outside the house has to be negotiated in determinate ways by the girls, this is also true of spatial divisions within the house. Socialization is undertaken through ideology disseminated through gender-specific tasks, such as girls are taught to do household work from a young age and this gets cemented as they grow up. The notion of tolerance and self-restraint are also rooted in a consciously cultivated feminine role which is legitimized through cultural ideology. Thus, according to Leela Dube, the structuring of women is fundamentally implicated in the constitution and reproduction of a social system characterized by gender asymmetry and the overall subordination of women and kinship. According to Leela Dube, gender relations are constructed differently in different cultures, and key area of cultural diversity is kinship, which form important systems which form the context within which gender relations are located. In her Women and Kinship Perspectives of Gender in South and Southeast Asia 1997, she focuses on the institutions that make up the structural and cultural dimension of kinship systems. According to him, kinship is often left out of gender studies because of deficient understanding of the organizing principles of kinship on everyday living. Kinship systems determine the allocation of resources, constitution of production relations, immediate context of women's life, and sustaining a specific ideology of gender. Thus, for Dube, studying kinship systems can better illuminate the location of gender relations in different cultures. Her basic argument is the book is that differences in kinship systems and family structures account for some critical differences among societies in the ways in which gender operates. Her central concern in the book was bringing out how gender roles are conceived of. Her basic argument in the book is that differences in kinship system and family structures account for some critical differences among societies in the ways in which gender operates. Her central concern in the book was to bring about how gender roles are conceived of and enacted, the processes through which men and women are turned into gendered subjects who then are implicated in the maintenance and sustenance of a social system. Dube studied family and kinship among some population of Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nepal, Pakistan, Philippines and Thailand, a comparative perspective. According to Dube, Asia has mainly three kinds of kinship system: patrilineal, matrilineal and bilateral. South Asia is predominantly patrilineal with two pockets of matrilineal systems in the southwest and northeast. South Asia is predominantly bilateral with both parents being important for reckoning kinship and claiming rights to resources. But there are also certain populations that follow either matrilineal or patrilineal. Dube argues in a book that it is not enough to just confine one's study to the structural characteristics of these institutions, but also to look at their interplay with religion and wider political and economic structures. Following from this, her work also assesses the relevance of family and of the ideological and material aspects of kinship to understand the nature of gender relations. To elucidate, she mentions in her introductory chapter that at any point in time, the composition of a family is not just a function of demography, but it also reflects the rules of marital recruitment, residence, and also the normative and actual patterns of rearrangement of the family structure. She further points out that her endeavor is not to study kinship in isolation as relevant to understanding gender relations. She mentions the importance of looking at cultural conception of biological processes and the nature of male and female sexuality. Dube points out the inherent dangers of such a study. Like while comparing and contrasting patrilineal and bilateral kinship system, one should keep in mind that there are no uniform, undifferentiated patterns for either. This also applies to matrilineal. She also warns against the danger of using a single generalized Asian model. For example, the apparent commonality in religious norms and legal codes as among the Muslims of Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Indonesia and Malaysia tends to fog the interplay between the cultural and structural matrices of societies and religions practiced in them. For instance, whereas there is a corporate or individual control over female sexuality and a strong emphasis on seclusion and segregation among patrilineal Muslim populations of Bangladesh, Pakistan and India, the situation among Muslims of Indonesia and Malaysia and also in Lakshadweep Islands are very different. South Asia show a special kind of male control over female sexuality rooted in the patrilineal ideology and consciousness of territoriality and group solidarity. Dube terms it as corporate control. In Southeast Asia, however, women are not placed under such severe restriction. Besides the absence of caste, other factors which contribute to this are the system of descent, inheritance, group membership, as well as residence and nature of conjugal relations. The notion of protection of women and control over them by men seems alien to the bilateral systems of kinship that exist in Southeast Asia. The placement of children also does not create acute problem as it would in India or most of the rest of the South Asia. Her book assesses the various implications that different kinship systems can have for understanding gender in terms of differing economic and productive roles that women can have, management of female sexuality, differing patterns of seclusion and segregation, and the limitations imposed on the female body. It tries to provide a comprehensive reading of the intersections of kinship, gender, religion, location, economic and political implications. It talks about the nuances of power or control through ideology, exercising control over distribution of resources, women's body and sexuality through ideology. Anthropological explorations into gender. The process of forming a gendered identity begins much prior to the birth of a child. It is a part of the collective cultural consciousness of a particular group or society. This process is understood in the dictum, gender is a social construct and sex is a biological phenomenon. It is a process of gender socialization which is just not a consequence of the belief system, culture and ritual practices, but also determines the structural needs of production relations of a society's economy, argues Datta. With the progression of society, there is a constant restructuring of these cultural practices. With the beginning of the women's movement in the 1970s, many women anthropologists led the search for beginning of gender subordination in order to provide evidence for a much needed theory of gender transformation. The sources for these explorations were mostly traditional texts such as Manusmriti and Puranas, which gave numerous examples of practices of gender discrimination. There has been a lack of comparative studies of diverse gender socialization processes reflected through anthropological investigations of different different groups in one place, till Leela Dube's anthropological explorations in gender intersecting fields. According to Chaya Datar, this book is interesting in the way it compares South Asian women's situation, strong matrilineal traditions to the patrilineal and patrilocal backgrounds of women in India. It highlights the role of culture in maintaining property structures and economic processes that inherited from one generation to another. Anthropological explorations represents over 50 years of Leela Dube's work. A common thread running through the essays is a complex and diverse relationship between gender and other axes of stratification like caste, class, religion, and significant role of kinship organization in determining structures of power that keep women subordinated in the family and community. It becomes important to note that not only are the contents of the book very important contribution to the beginning of a feminist theory building in India, but also she brings to the forefront a different array of sources that can be brought to an analysis of women's status and kinship relations. Insights from ethnographies, autobiography and biography, folklore, texts, rituals, myth, beliefs and practices of everyday life. In the first essay, Women's World, Three Encounters, she gives a narrative on the ethnographic fieldwork within the gendered field of anthropology. She discusses three of her fieldwork: her doctoral fieldwork experience among Gond women in 1940s, the fieldwork in a village in western Uttar Pradesh in 1950s to assess women's responses to government-sponsored community development programs, and her work on matrimony and Islam in Lakshadweep in 1970. Each of these experiences derives from the perspective of a woman ethnographer exploring the inner worlds of women, which are usually inaccessible to male ethnographers. She delicately identifies her location as a researcher who is a Brahmin, married and employed, and the impact that has on her data gathering and interactions with the group she visited. In the case of Lakshadweep population, she found herself having greater freedom in the movement and the notes that because of religious differences, there were some initial skepticism regarding her kumkum or sindoor, but removing it had the desired effect of free conversation. In her fieldwork experience in Uttar Pradesh, she was expected to conform to certain patterns of behavior given her Brahminical background, which was not expected of the American woman on the research team. In the second essay on the construction of gender, Dube portrays the everyday life of girls and women in Hindu patrilineal households by interpreting rituals, songs, ceremonies and other practices which help in determining the religious cultural aspect of defining gender relations and gender roles. Dube asserts that an analysis of kinship is necessary to understand family ideology and how it impacts the socialization patterns of women which lead to their devaluation within the structure. Her essay provides insights into how women are central to boundary maintenance between caste through regulation and control over their sexuality. Thus, kinship and caste becomes a larger contextual framework within which the social relationships for women are defined. According to Dube, kinship is also the organizing principle for allocation of resources within the family and duties and responsibilities of the members towards the maintenance and production value of the family unit, which in turn leads to segregation or differentiation of work based on gender. She analyzes all these interconnections through folklore and rituals in different communities, argues Datar. In a third essay, Seed and Earth, she analyzes this largely used metaphor of the role of the man and woman in reproduction. The general saying is that the man provides the seed for sowing and the woman is the earth or the soil in which the seed is sown. The implicit idea of this saying is that the nature of the crop, that is the offspring of the child, depends largely on the seed, which is the most important contribution, while the earth provides only the nutrition to the seed. Therefore, the child owes his or her identity to his father, whereas the mother has no material rights but only moral rights to the child. This idiom is used by Dube to explore the matrilineal of patrilineal kinship that exists in the country, since a paternal identity is most important in securing group placement and rights to the resources like inheritance. The fourth essay of the book, Caste and Women, Dube examines how women are implicated in three overlapping areas: occupational continuity and reproduction of caste, food and rituals, marriage and sexuality. The first area of occupational continuity is self-explanatory in the sense that women help in reproduction and extension of the family line and thereby the caste line. Food and rituals is the domain of women. Restrictions and commensality, a common way of maintaining caste boundaries, and women's knowledge of food and rituals associated with it help in maintaining the hierarchical caste boundary. This area leads to the formation of an active role which enhances the self-esteem of women. The control over the domain of domestic amongst the subordination and discrimination caused by the patrilineal structure will obviously have implications for the construction of the self-identity. Dube mentions the need to further study this particular field. Control over women's sexuality is central to the maintenance of caste hierarchy, and transgression can lead to extremely severe measure. This is because the reproductive value of the woman in terms of caste line extension and also collective sentiment of honor is based on the ritualistic notion of purity and pollution, make women the center of all mechanism of social control. Ritualization of virginity, glorification of marriage and motherhood are all methods of exerting sexual control. By looking at the complexity of caste in relation to female sexuality, Dube is able to bring out an analysis of primary and secondary marriages, caste endogamy, and its relation to dowry and the violence against women that is underwritten in all these articulations of caste and gender, argues Manjrekar. In a fifth essay, Who Gains from Matrilineal, is an investigation on how symmetry of gender is based on biological differences between man and woman. It provides insight into the life of women in the matrilineal island of Lakshadweep. It looks at how a matrilineal structure functions within a religion marked by patrilineal emphasis. Women in this community yield considerable power as originators of lineage, but matrilineally related men manage property and are more visible decision makers in public. Although there is a marked sexual division of labor present here as well, women lead a qualitatively more autonomous life than the ones within the patrilineal systems of South Asia. Administrative and legal interventions like the prohibition of polygamy, marriage and divorce laws, inheritance and property laws have all led to a transformation within the community, but there are still instances of matrilineal backdrop to all of. For example, men of Kalpani, location of research in Lakshadweep, refused the amendment to the system of inheritance of the Taravad property because under the pressure of changing economic and social aspects, men could draw support and security from the closely knit matrilineal units of the island. In the last essay of the book titled Kinship and Gender in South and South Asia, accounts for a more comparative perspective of kinship system. She comes to the conclusion that matrilineal and bilateral kinship system offer women more autonomy than the patrilineal way of kinship in South Asia. Her book helps to raise questions which can be taken up for further feminist research. It leads to questions like how do structures of power and domination influence the socialization of women and their responses. It brings to the front the intersecting fields of anthropology and gender, feminist scholarship and discipline, caste, religion and gender, various others which have been important to the development of feminist perspective of the discipline. Conclusion: Leela Dube's feminist perspective of feminist social anthropology. Leela Dube's feminist perspective comes not only from anthropological studies of different groups but also from how she takes into account her own life and context that it provides for her anthropological exploration. For example, in the construction of gender, Hindu girls in patrilineal India, she restricts her focus on socialization of Hindu girls for two reasons. Firstly, because most of her data was gathered from Hindu informants, and secondly, because of her own upbringing in a Hindu family, gave her first-hand information for understanding and interpreting the collective data. Her methodology resonates the feminist view that personal is political, and the researcher's position and life history provides contextual framework to the research undertaken by one. Dube has also written an autobiographical account of her work and experience and their interaction with the personal life in a paper, Doing Kinship and Gender, where she relates to her personal experiences as an academic person and also to her field experience. The article is an activity of self-reflexiveness which is also seen in most of her work. Leela Dube's methodology of feminist social anthropology helps us to identify and investigate the myriad ways in which women are insubordinated. In the introduction to Visibility and Power, Leela Dube emphasized the harm done in social sciences by using the term man and generic term. In the introduction to Visibility and Power, Leela Dube emphasized the harm done in social sciences by using the term man in a generic sense, since it resulted in getting the term woman subsumed under. This was decades before the notion of gender as a different from biological sex had established itself in the discipline in the country. She analyzed the inadequacy of academic literature in incorporating non-exclusive concepts and theories which do not take into cognizance the existence of women. She provided social sciences with new analytical frameworks by bringing in folklore and symbolic representations in society about women's position in order to show they have ideological hold and influence customs and practice. Dube's work on kinship and its importance also opened up an alternative worldview from that of Western theories, which postulated that patriarchy was a universal category unmediated by anything else. It opened up the pathways to look at caste and class as mediating factors which contribute to the degree and nature of subordination for women, which later scholars have taken up and highlighted. She opened up a new area of research within discipline of social anthropology, which was earlier taken as a study of tribes in distant locations with their different customs and exotic practices. She demystified this exotic nature of traditional anthropology by relating and comparing it to everyday lived realities of one's own society, argues Krishnaraj. Her analysis of gender-based division of labor of work and consideration of issues of women in household management have opened up the debate and discussion regarding the value of work done by women, especially the contribution contributions to the field of economics. It has also provided a more inclusive framework of analysis of social reality. Dube has played an important role in enriching the fields of social sciences and social anthropology by employing and thus making known multiple sources of knowledge, such as symbolic representations and their ideological significance, kinship and its perpetuation of sexual asymmetry in everyday lives of women, and the notion that generalizations and theoretical formulations developed in specific regional contexts are not always to be transformed into universality. Her work has helped to transform social anthropology as a discipline which used to study other cultures to one which can be used to explore and interpret one's own as well. In summary, after discussing the feminist approach to the study of Indian society by Leela Dube, one can argue that it is very important to understand the work of Leela Dube because she has for the first time understood caste and gender, religion and kinship within a feminist perspective. In doing so, she has tried to show how folklores, understanding myths and everyday lives of people, especially girls in India, are structured by the dominant notions of patrilineal, patriarchy and notions of caste and religion. Thank you.